I want to get started by asking you to go through a quick exercise. And when I show the word Canada, I want you to internalize as to what comes to mind. What does that mean to you? And while you're doing that, I want to explain to you a little experiment that I started about 2 months ago, a non-statistically valid water cooler experiment, I'll call it. And essentially what I did is I embarked on an endeavor to ask individuals that question. When I say Canada, what do you think? What comes to mind? And as you can imagine, there were an array of answers that would come, and most of us could predict what those would be. But what I found really interesting was kind of the subtle undertones that when you ask someone a question, they kind of retreat back and get a little pensive and go, what are we good at? And I didn't intend to kind of document that as part of the outcome of the questions I was asking, or the question I was asking, but I started to kind of pay attention and watch what people were saying, and I'm like, wow, they're asking the question, what are we good at? And inevitably people would say, well, hockey, and we have a fairly good healthcare system, and we're good at nature, which I would pause and say that sentence doesn't really make sense. There should be a verb somewhere in there, but I digress. But what was really interesting is what was omitted when I went through that. And I went in with a hypothesis behind the scenes, kind of wondering, will this come up? And through the conversation, very few people at the onset, and then subsequently after I kind of pushed it, very few people actually associated a Canadian brand in manufacturing. And I found that a little bit surprising until I kind of took a step back and went, well, you know what? 30, 40, 50 years ago, had I said Canada, especially in this part of the country, I could imagine that manufacturing would have been maybe tied with agriculture in our community as one of the first things that people would associate with Canada. And there's a myriad of reasons as to why now people are not thinking manufacturing first. Why now it's not embedded in our social, economic, cultural, potentially religious fabric, that manufacturing doesn't come top of mind. And the way I look at it, we have to ask ourselves a pivotal question. We as a country, are we in manufacturing, politically, socially, strategically, economically, whatever variable you want to look at, or are we not? And the way I look at it, there's really only two ways you can answer that question. You can say no, or you can say yes. And if you look at no and the myriad of reasons as to why you would say no, well, let's kind of walk through them. We have high labor costs. How on earth do we compete with China and India? A lot of union labor issues. Rise, albeit percolating right now, of the Canadian dollar. Our baby boomer population that were once eminent in manufacturing are getting older and starting to die off, so we're losing a bit of the know-how and buzz. Those are the reasons why, arguably, we should just get out and stop and find something new for our country to really drive our economic and social prosperity. Well, let's go to the flip side. Let's say yes. Yes, we should, as a country, make a position and say, we're going to be in manufacturing and we're going to be good at it, and ask this question 40, 50 years from now, and when you ask people Canada, what are they going to say? Well, first will be hockey. Secondly, hopefully will be manufacturing. And for the reasons that I said no, are part of the reasons why I think we should be in it. We have know-how, we have talent. In this community, we have bricks and mortar infrastructure. We have manufacturing assembly lines. We actually do have interesting tax policies that would encourage manufacturing. We have government incentives. We actually can be competitive. And the reality is, though, the way that it's worked for the last X number of years, unfortunately, is gone. And I answer this question by saying, absolutely, we should be in the game of manufacturing as a country. But the way that we get there, and the way that we win, and the way that we maintain competitiveness on the global stage is very different. And it's different through this: consumerization. Now, I'm not actually sure that consumerization is a real word. That aside, it's consumerization. And consumerization is a term that essentially means the principles that consumers have, individuals, retail. When you do something, there's a good user interface engagement. And why can't the business world adopt some of the consumer principles? And to give you context, I want to give for you a very important example, and then I want to relate it to the manufacturing industry. For those who have worked in any business job, over the last 50 years, you have engagement with a computer screen. Now, most of those computer screens that you work with at your day job, be it in warehousing, HR, finance, whatever functional activity you're doing in your computer, many of those legacy systems were the infamous kind of greenish screen with the white font, and you had a user manual this long, and it took 3 weeks of orientation. You know, F1 for this, and Control X, space dot, enter some data, go back to the main menu, F2. A very laborious exercise. And that historically has been, and many businesses continue to operate on those systems. Well, along comes the late 90s, and you have companies such as Amazon.com and app development and the principles of Apple, where all of a sudden design principle and user interface just hits the consumer world like a ton of bricks. And if you can remember in the late 90s, shortly after the adoption or release of Amazon and into the early 2000s, for those that remember that era well, there was a huge buzz in the global community around, have you seen the Amazon shopping cart? And people were like, what do you mean? And all it was, for those who know, is you went online, you went to Amazon.com, there was a catalog of items that you could click, 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 and then you took those items and dropped them into a virtual shopping cart that actually looked like a shopping cart. You then took that shopping cart and went to a virtual checkout that actually looked like a checkout. Then you hit purchase, and 2 weeks later, items showed up at your house, but you were so enthralled with the process of doing the Amazon shopping cart, most of the things you bought you didn't even want or need, but you just like the process of getting there. Shortly after that, the business community said, well, why do we have these laborious interfaces for our business terminology, business functions, business computers, when there's such a huge uptake and interest in the entertainment of engaging with user interfaces? So many of these business companies now have adopted principles that work for the retail consumer world to their business systems. And surprisingly, for those who may not be familiar with the procurement systems on how you buy stuff for large companies, they now have shopping carts. And it's entertaining and it's fun to go to work because you now no longer have these 400-page manuals that take 2 weeks of training to get engaged. And you call that the consumerization of enterprise IT. They've adopted design principles in the retail consumer world and said, well, let's apply it to the business world. So why do I use that example? I think the way that Canada can win and compete in the manufacturing world is going to be so dramatically different that I hope to blow your mind in the next 8 minutes. The consumerization of manufacturing. What do I mean by this? We are now at a stage, at this time right now, that manufacturing technology has evolved that can change the paradigm and how we look at manufacturing, and I believe will salvage the manufacturing industry, not only for this part of the province, but for our country. And there's a whole suite of things, technology developments, that will enable us to do this. But I'm only going to focus on one, and one that all of you have seen in the media, but may not have a full appreciation for the impact that it will have on our society. And that is a 3D printer. And a 3D printer has actually been around for quite a while, but where this world is going is you can get a 3D printer now for about $1,500, and you can envision how quickly that price is going to come down following the model of the flat screen TVs. And the consumables being products like grassroots plastics that you can put into this, and through some heating and cutting, you can actually physically produce three-dimensional objects. That is revolutionizing the way that manufacturing will happen, and it's on trend with some really important global stats. The world wants to move to a customization model, where you build something specifically for you. You want to do it very, very fast, no longer a week or two. You want it tomorrow, you want it tonight. And lastly, you want to do it at a low cost. Those are the top 3 global trends right now that is absolutely shadowing the manufacturing industry. So I want to paint for you a picture that I hope you internalize and really can appreciate. This is my dream. I have other dreams. This one's kind of my nerdy dream. But this is one I would love to actually be able to have in the next few years. Not 10 years, maybe even the next year, depending on how things go. And I call it the Advanced Manufacturing Dinner Party. And yes, I would have parties with other themes, and perhaps the guests I invite, I would not call it the Advanced Manufacturing Dinner Party for hope that they may not potentially come. But that said, I want to run a scenario through you, with you, to give you some insight as to why this will revolutionize the culture of advanced manufacturing that will make our industry in this country, this community, very competitive. So visualize with me. Myself and my virtual girlfriend. I just saw my mom perk up. Girlfriend? Really? Oh, great. No. Envision myself inviting a group of 8 people over. We're going to come over, we're going to sit down, we're going to hang out. It's going to be social, it's going to be fun, it's going to be entertaining, as any dinner party would be. Inevitably, someone will say, well, hey, why don't we play a game? And, the very traditional person will say, let's play Scrabble. And I'll say, no, let's not play Scrabble. Let's do something fun. And I said, I have an idea. Why don't we, given that we're going to be drinking, why don't we each make our own cup? And then they might say, well, whatever do you mean? I said, well, in my living room over there, there's my 3D printer. Let's each make our own cup, and let's customize it to each person. Well, that sounds fun. That sounds entertaining. That sounds engaging. I'm interested in manufacturing. Okay, well, hey, how do we do this? Well, let me run and get my iPad or my Android or my BlackBerry tablet. And there's already software on here that has all the exceptional design principles and user interfaces that are going to make it very easy for you to go on and design your 3-dimensional cup to whatever shape, size, configuration you want. Oh, and more interestingly, there's a virtual community online that also likes to design cups, so maybe you can pick a standard from there as a starting point and then tweak it, or you can start from your own. But the world is already well evolved into that, so you start and do what you want. Said individual with no computer skills can start to build it and design it and go, okay, I think I'm done, but I want something more. Is it possible maybe I can put like the contour of my face embedded on the facade of the cup? Does anyone have a digital camera? No? Well, don't worry about it. I'll go to my Microsoft Xbox, grab the Kinect component off the top, and hold on, let me plug it into my laptop, hold still, and I'll do a 270-degree scan of your face. I will then download that into the iPad app that you have, hit render, and now you have this drag and drop graphic that you can put on the facade of your cup. And do you want it at the top? Do you want it at the bottom? Do you want it at the middle? And then you take a look at it and go, are you happy with that? It's been 20 minutes. Do you have it done? Okay, done. Hit print. 3D printer. The stool is to represent actual size of a rough 3D printer today. 20, 30 minutes later, whatever the time frame is, done, boom. There's your cup. Oh, by the way, you have giant ears, but nonetheless, there is your cup. Who's next? Speed to market, customization, low cost. We're not quite there on the cost element yet, but we'll be there in a few years. But what I've done in that example, and what I'm really hoping for, those individuals may have children, nieces, nephews. They're now inspired by an act that historically has been a business act, industrial, large, manufacturing. And we've taken the consumerization element, design principles of it, with something that happens today. This scenario that I have just described already happens in many households in North America. It's entertaining, it's engaging, and that's what makes it cool. That's the parallel that I would associate with the IT example. So inevitably what will happen, and again, this is my hypothesis, the children of those individuals will start talking and say, hey, my parents did this. Well, we're going to get a 3D printer in a couple years when the costs come down. And those groups will start to talk. And you can envision this community here where we have know-how, simple-to-use interfaces, new generations coming up where they go to dinner parties and they make stuff. Well, think of the serendipitous connections that will happen with total strangers when you convene on various innovation centers and coffee shops and they're having conversations about an industry that was critically important. Then someone will say, well, maybe we can scale this. Maybe we can do a mass customization manufacturing line. Maybe this is how we'll start to win. And you could see all these elements coming together. And the technology is here today, and it has already worked in the IT world. This is happening, it's here to stay, and it will revolutionize how we look at manufacturing. Mass customization, speed to market, low cost. So someone had asked me, because I get quite passionate about this topic, someone had asked me, well, it seems a little bit, far-fetched, maybe long-term. I said, but if you were to predict in reality, when do you think this would become ingrained in our economic, social, cultural fabric as a country that would really enable us to compete in the manufacturing world? And what was really interesting is I said, well, probably about 48 years from now. And of course you get people going, why on earth would you pick 48 years? And there's science behind this, maybe a little quirky science, because if you take 2014 and you add 48 years, you get the year 2062. And for those that remember George, Jane, Judy, and Elroy, the futuristic utopia that the Jetsons lived in was 2062. And if you go back and watch a lot of episodes, you will remember many a scene in the kitchen where one of the characters will speak to the robot and say, I would like to have this. So the design interface is there, that's easy, but they don't know how it works in the back end. They push a button, they open up a door, and voila, there are their items that they had requested. The Jetsons actually were onto something, and I really think that's the way of the future. Everybody, go make stuff. Thank you for your time.